Good morning. My name is byPrashant, and I'm a little odd man out because I'm neither an academic nor a practitioner. Spent 25 years in the corporate sector, and the last 5 years been trying to learn some of these issues that we are talking about. So what I'm going to share with you is some of the observations that I've had. I can't even say it's a study in my engagement with some of the tribal communities which I've been fortunate to engage with in the course of my last 5 years work. So first is, I'm also going to reflect some of the issues which DN mentioned. Once upon a time, long time ago, there was a world with no indigenous communities because nobody told those people that they are indigenous. Everybody was indigenous, right? And then came industrial revolution, colonization, modernity, a lot of the words that we used in the last couple of days. And during this process was created these labels. We started with primitive and the Eurocentric exploration and colonization started happening, tribal, aboriginal, and now we also call these communities indigenous communities. But when we say indigenous communities, when we say aboriginals, we have a mental picture of a community which is living in some secluded, remote area. They have a really unique culture and not within quotes developed as we see them. So, and that's the way we view. And I was talking to this lady, and those few hours I spent with her, the kind of dignity and grace with which she carries herself, the kind of wisdom that she shared is completely different from what we even engage with in our developed world. But now let me come to the whole thing of the knowledge society and information technology, which is going to be my talk. But this uniqueness, in many ways, when that road of 6 kilometers was built or a bridge is built, it is already fading, even much before information technology or telecom or anything else comes in. And the reality of homogenization, that's what I think DN touched upon, is absolutely there. It is real. Whether we intervene, not intervene, whether ICT intervenes, not intervenes, reality of homogenization is sweeping across the world. And I think DN used the term of, are we in a point of history, indigenous? And that's very, very pertinent in this context. Every society at a point in history would be indigenous, it moves on. So the question is that moving on period, how do we actually treat that moving on period? And is there, being the other, part of the larger mainstream, is there within quotes a kind of responsibility that we feel? Or within quotes on the other side, is there a need for an external support, help, engagement, and how that can be? In the context of knowledge societies, I've just mentioned our indigenous knowledge system. A couple of points because the group here will be very, very aware of it. One thing I found was that, and this is a gentleman I met whose family makes ropes out of coconut husk. So some of the knowledge systems, or most of the knowledge systems in indigenous communities are very, very location specific. So they use the material in the location, the culture in the location, and the knowledge system sort of engage with that. And this is his wife. So there's a very strong engagement with nature and a strong engagement within the community when we talk about knowledge systems of indigenous communities. There's also minimal use of technology. This gentleman, they have a sugarcane extraction thing. So it is very interesting. They will extract the sugarcane through that contraction in the middle. Underground, it is collected. And then there's a pipe which goes just next door to this oven, and where they boil it for a long period of time, and jaggery is actually produced. Very simple thing, but local context, local technology, and strong engagement with nature. This is a puppeteer in an Andhra village that I got to know through a friend of mine. The whole, again, the knowledge system is holistic. While we look at the modern knowledge systems, in many cases it becomes very siloed and very, very fragmented, and later on we try to put it together. Whereas Here, the person has got an aesthetic sense, he's got a technological sense because he has to cure the leather, he has to know how to cut it, he has to know how this whole contraption works to allow the movement, and he also sings, he also engages with the community. And the whole back room for the performance is his entire extended family. His father sings, his wife is on a particular instrument, his children are doing the smaller instruments, and some of them are participating in the. And the transference of the knowledge is also at a very, very personal level. It is individual to individual, individual to community, and it's not through any other mediation, through any other group. So some of these are the essence of knowledge systems of indigenous communities. But what I could, what impacted me most was that the indigenous knowledge systems are experiential, for one. Second is they enable an engagement with man and the nature. But to me, most importantly, this engagement is within the capacity of the nature to regenerate itself and for man to sort of rejuvenate himself. Because if you look at the other technology exploitation of the mainstream, we exploit the nature in much, much faster pace than the nature can sort of recuperate, rejuvenate, recreate. So this is for me the most important thing, which is a personal thing, understanding that that is one of the needs why we need to revisit indigenous knowledge and indigenous systems of doing things, because now we are at a stage in our evolution as a worldwide community that we are going to be at a very detrimental stage for our ecology and for our own mankind if we don't take elements of this and try to apply it in the way we are doing things. So in this context, when we look at ICT, there are a lot of positives, but let me first touch upon a few negatives, and some of this I actually put it last night listening to many of my friends speak here. First one is, ICT actually moves indigenous communities nearer to the dominant mainstream. And this is a real picture. And this boy's name is Nadiraj. And I had long conversations with him. Now, if you look at him, he's a member of the Siddhi club. The Sun TV dish antenna is already there. It has reached even before anything else. Maybe it has reached even before the roads have come, because it needs only a satellite image for capturing that. Look at his attire, So there are certain social changes which precede, which come naturally, regardless of any kind of intervention, regardless of any kind of impact of ICT, which actually create dreams, create aspirations, create their own kind of a movement towards a particular direction, which we are in no position to be judgmental of and say, look, this is wrong, this is bad, this is whatever. Those labels doesn't really, they are not appropriate and they are not accepted. Second thing is, we also say it speaks of cultural colonization. Now this is from my visit to the community which develops the Durga Puja statues just before the Puja time in Kolkata. If you look at, all of us know the image of Durga Devi, right? But if you see the forms, they have all become Bollywoodized. Okay, they have become in their form. Right now, there are two ways of looking at it. One is that the cultural colonization is happening. Second way of looking at it is they are also looking at what the society needs and responding and changing their entire thing to say, okay, this is the kind of forms that I now need to make. Right? But whichever way we look at it, it is changing. And that change is sweeping regardless of any intervention, any ICT, whatever. This is another lady that I met who makes these kind of patterns, and she is invited for any ceremony, and she makes this whereas it captures the energy, it gives the blessings, etc., etc. So I tried learning this from them. Now, all these are now things which are now taken by ICT, used in animation, used in new ways of design, aesthetics, etc. But ICT can only take those elements. It completely leaves and misses the context, the beliefs behind it, right? So these are some of the concerns that which I thought I would share. There are a lot more, but in the brevity of time. So why do we need to preserve the indigenous knowledge? who needs it? The same question which DN asked. If you look at this child is the granddaughter of the two people who are making the coir ropes. Now look at the dabba she is holding. It's a Pond's powder, talcum powder, right? And it's a very important symbol in a sense of what is the aspiration, what is the engagement. So who needs to keep that earlier indigenous knowledge, or is there a move, aspiration to move to something very different, very mainstream, very alluring in certain ways? So again, coming back in that context, when we ask who needs it, it's actually the larger community needs it for the reason that I earlier mentioned, that it is time to allow nature to regenerate itself and for man to rejuvenate himself. For a moment, forget about we are helping people who need help, there is some group which needs to be preserved, all of that. For purely selfish reasons, as a larger community, if we don't reinvent ourselves a little bit by bringing in these elements, it will be too late for us to do that later on. So in that context, ICT is only a tool to make that change. But the deeper things are what are the social motivations of the community, of the people who are engaging with those communities, etc. So for example, in Honavar in Angadivel, small, very, very small village, this is the attire of school students going. So even organized education in many ways will need to be looked at differently if you are going to look at how do we engage with indigenous knowledge systems. There is an alignment of aspirations of the community. Like this is a performance which the small community was putting for us. The boy in the background had just come in maybe about 15 minutes once the performance had started. You know, he was aloof. He was in his college attire and things like that, pants and shirt and whatever. But in a little while, when the tempo really this thing, he couldn't resist himself. He just jumped in, took one of those things from one of his elders, and he started dancing. Right? So there is, there is an anchor, there is a pride, there is also a relating of the tribe to even the newer generation to it. But how does that get channelized is the whole question. This is a photograph from Lake Forest, right? The children here, when I was talking to DN, they wanted to perform. The boys, you had to push them away. But at the same time, that urge to participate, the urge to be part of it, the urge to be part of that knowledge system and its perpetuation as something which has to really come from the community to which it belongs in a way. But once it is there, then we can talk about how do we use the vehicle of ICT and many other vehicles to optimize it. First thing is self-determination by the community. What does the community want? How do they want to think? But having said that, because in DN's thing he referred to being innocent and being ignorant, and ignorance can be a good space to be exploited. So minimum level playing field is something, because that's how the governance works, that's how governments work, right? How do we provide basic ICT infrastructure, inexpensive software, locally relevant applications? And there are many experiments, like the hole-in-the-wall experiment, which you might be familiar with. The gentleman left a computer on a wall and left. And after 6 months, or periodically when he went and checked, people have already learned how to use it. Children were using it. Children were browsing. They are already looked at how to see whatever that is available through that connectivity. Community participation, holistic approach. Because most of the knowledge systems of indigenous communities are holistic. It touches heritage, it touches livelihood, it touches learning, it touches engagement, it touches many, many things. But if you look at it as one single silo and say, okay, I will look at livelihood, but I will not look at heritage, then we are not responding to it or engaging with it in the same fashion that the knowledge system exists. Now, two very, very powerful things are now taking shape and gaining a lot of momentum. One is the whole concept of Creative Commons, and the other is the concept of open source. Because these two together is going to really give an impetus to many of these things that we talked about in terms of economic economically viable solutions which can come. Actually, the government of India last month has actually appointed a senior technocrat to drive open source movement in India, which is a very positive step by the government. Creative Commons things are really taking up, so this whole issue related to intellectual property and all of that is also going to get mediated to that. And the typical example when we talk about ICT and communities, community radios, digitized land records, market linkages where farmers can get input about the market prices, e-governance. But there are a lot of other initiatives which are also happening in our country and outside. This is a very recent one. People Archive of Rural India, PARI. It's a recently launched, I think last week launched. I would urge everybody to, especially in this community, to go and engage with it. It's a beautiful site. There's a lot of engagement at very local levels. And it is a question of, like yesterday, we were, that folklore is being made as we speak. And how do we capture all of that as it is happening, not as it happened, decades back. And this is one of the very powerful ways in which it is being done. Another thing is, how do you take local knowledge and then make it applicable wherever it is applicable worldwide? Because there is essence. It is not at one level, it is isolated, unique, but at another level, the frameworks of that is many cases applicable globally. And that application brings back a kind of sense of pride, a sense of recognition, and will help and encourage the communities to engage with it even much more. Then, like somebody said, if you try to preserve it, it disappears. But if you try to practice it, and through that practice, these knowledge systems will have a much longer life and more practical. This is another one, the Honeybee Initiative, which is also in our country. Very powerful, and this is something which you can also check in the portal. Encourages participation and sharing the value back with the community. So I will just last two slides. One is knowledge does not deplete like other resources with consumption, but it will deplete with neglect and dilution. And this is a gentleman I met in Honavar. He's 104 years old, extremely healthy. His house, the house that he lives in, is also equally as old as he is. That kind of traditions we have completely lost, but we can engage with them in different ways. So my submission is that we should move from the thing of preservation. Preservation is a very defensive kind of a word, and see how it can be made relevant, how in that making it relevant, how it can actually actively grow and leverage indigenous knowledge for our day-to-day life, for the betterment of the ecology and the ecosystem. And today it has a relevance to the community, and not only the indigenous community, but much beyond. And ICT can actually be a powerful tool in making this happen.